My brother stole my life savings while I paid his rent and bought his car, so I cut him out completely and never looked back. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible older brother. My parents always leaned on me for everything: bills, chores, life advice, even covering mistakes my younger brother, Dylan, made. While I was balancing overtime shifts and quietly saving for my own future, Dylan floated through life like nothing mattered. He was always the golden child, praised for small achievements, excused for errors, and somehow allowed to skate by while I carried the weight for both of us. I remember the first time he asked me for rent money. It wasn't much, but I'd just saved up for my own plans. "Hey, can you spot me this month?" he said, leaning lazily against the doorway, phone in hand. I hesitated, feeling the tug of responsibility clash with frustration. But I paid, again. It wasn't just about the money, it was about keeping the peace, keeping the family functioning. I worked late nights, poured myself into saving every dollar, and tried to teach him responsibility through example. I'd leave notes, gently suggest budgeting, or sit him down to talk about his spending. Most of the time, he smiled, nodded, and then ignored everything the next day. Those small moments should have been my warning, the red flags waving quietly in plain sight. I started noticing patterns: vague excuses about missing payments, casual mentions of other friends covering him, little hints that he expected me to be the safety net. At the time, I brushed it off as laziness, thinking that eventually, he'd grow up. Loyalty and family had always been my compass. Sacrifice was part of my identity, and I convinced myself it was worth it. But even as I proudly considered myself the backbone of my family, I didn't know that this trust one built, this willingness to always step in, was quietly being logged, studied, and would one day be used against me in ways I couldn't yet imagine. Every payment, every favor, every "it's fine, I got this next time," was a thread being woven into a rope that could strangle me. And the first sign of that rope tightening was closer than I thought. By the time Dylan started losing jobs regularly, I had already settled into the role of family backup plan. It began innocently enough. He'd call me from his small apartment, voice tight with worry, asking if I could cover rent just this once. "I'll pay you back next month, promise," he'd say, and I'd hear the desperation under the rehearsed casual tone. I would sigh, open my wallet, and transfer the money, convincing myself it was temporary. Each time, I told myself, this is what family does, this is what I do. But looking back, those small bails felt less like support and more like the first bricks of a wall being built around me. I remember one Thursday evening, Dylan leaning on the kitchen counter as I counted bills. "Man, you're always so responsible," he said with that easy grin of his. I forced a smile, shrugging. "Someone has to be," I muttered. It should have struck me as odd how nonchalantly he treated my exhaustion, how natural it was for him to rely on me without hesitation. Even our parents played a role in this imbalance. They'd casually mention how proud they were of Dylan for keeping his cool, despite his troubles, while my sacrifices went unsaid or were treated as obligations. At family dinners, I'd watch him joke about needing a new phone or car, and my parents would nod sympathetically, never asking if I could manage my own life. The quiet resentment simmered in me, but I swallowed it, blaming myself for feeling frustrated. The red flags kept piling up, Dylan disappearing for days after I helped him, subtle manipulations in conversation, and a growing sense that he'd learned he could lean on me indefinitely. Still, I wanted to believe he'd eventually understand responsibility. I wanted to believe he'd one day see that my support wasn't endless. But deep down, I was starting to feel it, the lines of loyalty were blurring, and the family dynamic I had clung to for so long was slowly tipping into something dangerous. I just didn't know how sharp the fall would be, or how close I already was to losing everything I had worked for. It was the summer Dylan told me he needed a reliable car for work. I should have hesitated, really thought about it, but he had that look, that mix of charm and quiet entitlement, and I folded. "I can't keep borrowing from you forever," I muttered, handing over the check for the car. He shrugged, grinning. "Thanks, man. You're the best. I owe you one." I nodded, forcing a smile, while a pit in my stomach told me this wasn't just a favor, it was becoming a habit, a pattern I couldn't escape. The car was shiny, new, perfect, and I felt a fleeting pride as I imagined him driving to interviews, starting fresh, maybe even learning responsibility. But almost immediately, small things began to unsettle me. He casually mentioned I had extra money saved up and how he deserved this more than I did, like it was a foregone conclusion that I would always provide. That tiny seed of arrogance should have alarmed me, but I brushed it off, telling myself it was normal sibling banter. I spent hours after work counting my dwindling savings, scanning through my bank statements, and feeling the creeping tension between pride and unease. I tried to rationalize, I'm helping my brother. I'm doing the right thing. This will build him up. At night, I'd hear the soft hum of the city outside my apartment, smell the faint lingering scent of my dinner as I stared at my empty wallet. The weight of carrying his life on my shoulders pressed down in a way I hadn't felt before. Even as I reminded myself that family comes first, subtle cracks were forming. Dylan's casual attitude, the way he treated my sacrifices as invisible, and his quiet, effortless manipulations all hinted that something was off. The worry gnawed at me. Had I just bought him a car, or had I handed him a license to exploit me further? I tried to push the thought away, imagining him succeeding, imagining us both eventually thriving. But deep down, a cold suspicion had started to settle in, and it was only going to get worse from here. It started with small things, odd withdrawals from my accounts, unexplained charges that didn't make sense. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, blaming my own forgetfulness or some bank error. But then the pattern became impossible to ignore. Dylan had a way of explaining every discrepancy casually, laughing it off like it was nothing, making me question my own judgment. Must have been some subscription I forgot to cancel, he'd say, voice smooth, eyes avoiding mine. I wanted so badly to trust him, to believe my own brother couldn't be capable of hurting me, but the unease kept gnawing at my gut. Every time I confronted him gently, he'd deflect, charm me, or subtly guilt-trip me. You're overthinking again. I'd never do that to you, he'd say, leaning back on the couch with that effortless confidence that made it hard to argue. Even our parents unknowingly fed into it, praising him for small wins while quietly expecting me to fix problems behind the scenes. Their praise of him felt like a punch in the gut. Here I was, exhausted, sacrificing everything, and yet invisible in my own home. I started noticing how easily he justified his luxuries, his casual spending, while I tightened my belt. The sense of entitlement was growing before my eyes, and with it, the realization that I wasn't just being supportive anymore, I was being taken advantage of. The smell of his fast food wrappers piling up on the counter, the sound of his laughter echoing late at night while I counted pennies for rent, every little thing became a reminder of how deeply this imbalance had rooted itself in our lives. The red flags kept multiplying, vague excuses, disappearing for days, casually asking for favors I'd already done countless times. I tried to tell myself I was patient, I was loyal, I was doing the right thing. But there was a sinking feeling in my chest, a cold truth I refused to confront. These small betrayals were just the calm before the storm. And I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. I'll never forget the day I discovered my entire life savings had vanished. I logged into my account, expecting to see a few smaller withdrawals, maybe a mistaken transaction, but the balance was zero. Every late-night shift, every dollar I had painstakingly saved, gone. My stomach dropped, my hands shook, and for a moment, I couldn't even breathe. I thought, this has to be a mistake. It has to be. But the evidence was undeniable. Dylan had found a way to drain my account, slowly at first, then all at once. I confronted him immediately, heart hammering, voice tight with rage. Dylan, what the hell did you do? I demanded. He shrugged, a lazy smirk forming, as if this was some game I had failed to understand. I didn't mean for it to get this bad, he muttered, eyes darting away. His casual tone made my blood boil, and I realized in that moment that this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. Everything hit me at once, the countless favors, the car, the rent, all of it. I'd been building him up for years, thinking I was helping him, guiding him, being a responsible brother. And all that trust, all that effort, had been weaponized against me. The betrayal cut so deep I felt hollow, like someone had punched a hole straight through my chest. For the first time in my life, I felt truly powerless. The weight of exhaustion, guilt, and heartbreak crashed over me, and I sat on my couch staring at the empty numbers on my screen. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him feel even a fraction of what I felt, but all I could do was sink into the shock. And yet, even in that numbness, a flicker of clarity started to emerge. I couldn't undo what happened, but I could control what came next. The realization was terrifying, but necessary. How I responded to Dylan from here would define everything. I confronted Dylan again, this time with everything laid bare, my voice trembling but sharp. "You emptied my savings," I said, pacing the living room. "Every single dollar I worked for, you took it." He leaned against the wall, casual, almost amused. "It's not that simple," he muttered, as if there was some moral gray area I wasn't seeing. My stomach turned, disbelief mixing with rage. How could he sit there, act so calm, and speak like I was overreacting? I tried to understand his side, but there was nothing there, just excuses wrapped in charm. "You'll understand someday," he said, shrugging as if my pain was just part of growing up. My parents overheard bits of the argument, and their reaction split me in two. My mother's eyes were wide with shock, but my father hesitated, unsure whom to believe. It was surreal. The man I defended, supported, and covered for years was now openly defying me, and the family I thought would stand by me seemed unsure. The tension in the room was suffocating, thick enough to taste. I could feel my chest tightening, hear the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant city traffic, everything magnifying my helplessness. For the first time, I realized that Dylan didn't just take my money, he had been manipulating me emotionally for years, exploiting my loyalty until it broke. I left that confrontation feeling hollow, the weight of betrayal pressing down like a physical force. Sleep didn't come, food didn't taste right, and every familiar sound in my apartment felt tainted. I replayed his words, his smirks, the way he made me question my own judgment. And the scariest part? I knew this wasn't the end. Dylan would push, manipulate, and test me again if I let him. I was standing at a crossroads, either let him keep controlling my life or find a way to reclaim it, no matter the cost. The first step toward taking back my life had to be careful, calculated, but I had no idea how much it would hurt before I got there. After that confrontation, the emotional fallout hit me like a freight train. I couldn't focus at work, I couldn't eat properly, and even walking down the street felt heavy. Every familiar sound, the hum of the city, neighbors laughing, the clatter of dishes at home, reminded me of Dylan and the betrayal I'd just endured. I found myself replaying every past interaction, every favor I'd done, trying to pinpoint the exact moment I should have seen the signs. The guilt gnawed at me too. Had I been naive? Blindly loyal? Or just stupid? My friends noticed the change. "You've been quiet lately," one said, concern in his voice. I wanted to tell them everything, but the shame made the words stick in my throat. I couldn't just admit that my own brother had stolen everything I had, that the person I'd trusted most had weaponized my loyalty. I spent nights pacing my apartment, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I wasn't a failure, even as the hollow ache in my chest told me otherwise. Dylan, of course, carried on as if nothing had happened. Social media posts of weekends out, casual texts asking for favors, and even sly reminders of how much I'd helped him landed like salt in an open wound. It was maddening. He hadn't learned, hadn't felt remorse, and worse, he seemed to enjoy the control he still had over me. The thought of continuing like this made my stomach churn. I realized then that I couldn't just confront him anymore, the emotional toll was too high. I needed to reclaim my life on my own terms, silently, strategically. Every decision had to be measured, every move calculated, because one wrong step could allow him to strike again. And as I sat in my apartment, the cold air pressing against the windowpane, I made a choice. I was done being the victim. But getting my power back, that was going to hurt more than I could imagine. I decided to start reclaiming my life, quietly but deliberately. I began tightening boundaries, refusing his calls when he asked for money, and avoiding conversations that might let him manipulate me again. Each time he asked, I simply said, no. I can't help right now, and held my ground, even when his voice cracked with fake hurt. It was terrifying at first, every instinct screamed to cave, to keep the peace, but I forced myself to stay firm. For the first time, I felt a flicker of control, like I was stepping out from under a shadow that had haunted me for years. Dylan didn't take it well. His casual arrogance turned to frustration, subtle digs, and passive-aggressive remarks that stung more than anything he'd done before. "You're being ridiculous," he said one evening, leaning on the doorway, trying to catch me off guard. I refused to react, breathing slowly, keeping my expression neutral. He didn't understand that the rules had changed. I was no longer a soft target. Even my parents struggled with this. My mother would sigh and ask if I was being too harsh, while my father just shook his head, caught somewhere between support and doubt. Their hesitation stung, but it also reinforced why I had to do this for myself. I could no longer rely on others to recognize the truth. I had to act, silently but decisively. Every day, I fortified my boundaries a little more. I stopped sharing financial details, changed passwords, and redirected any support I had been giving him elsewhere. It wasn't easy. I felt guilt, loneliness, and waves of anger, but each small victory gave me strength. And as I lay in bed some nights, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, I realized, this withdrawal was only the beginning. Dylan had been relying on me for years, and now, for the first time, the power had shifted. Dylan didn't stay quiet for long. Almost immediately, his frustration turned into aggression and subtle attempts to regain control. I started getting texts late at night, passive-aggressive comments about how helpful I used to be, and sly reminders of every favor I had done. "I guess family isn't so important to you anymore," he wrote one evening, and I felt my chest tighten. He was testing me, poking at the walls I had built, trying to see if he could still manipulate my guilt. I could see the shift in him clearly now, his arrogance, the audacity, the casual cruelty that had always been lurking beneath his charm. It hit me that this wasn't just laziness or entitlement, it was a conscious choice, a pattern he had perfected over years of relying on me. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and fear. I realized he wasn't going to stop until I completely removed the leverage he had over me. The subtle manipulations weren't just emotional anymore. He started trying to influence my friends, twisting stories, making small digs and casual conversation to turn people against me. Even the thought of him meddling in my life while I tried to heal made my blood boil. I spent nights pacing, listening to the distant hum of traffic outside my apartment, trying to map out how I could protect myself without falling into another trap. I felt a growing determination hardening in my chest. Dylan might have had power for years, but I had something he didn't: clarity. I knew exactly who he was, exactly what he had done, and exactly what I had to do to reclaim control. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope mixed with the cold, sharp edge of revenge. The worst part? I knew the coming confrontation wouldn't be easy. He would push, manipulate, and test me until the very end. And I had to be ready, because this time, I wasn't going to lose. It all came to a head one weekend when the family gathered for what was supposed to be a casual dinner. I could feel the tension before Dylan even arrived, the air thick with the unspoken knowledge that things had shifted. When he walked in, smirking like nothing had changed, I knew this was the moment. "We need to talk," I said, voice low but firm, and the room went silent. Everyone turned to look at us, and I felt the weight of their eyes, the judgment, the anticipation. I laid it out, piece by piece, with evidence I had quietly collected: bank statements, receipts, dates, and amounts. "You emptied my savings, Dylan. Every dollar I worked for. You manipulated me, and you lied to everyone, including Mom and Dad," I said, my hands trembling but steady. His smirk faltered, just slightly, and I saw the first flicker of panic. He tried to argue, deflect, charm. "It wasn't all like that," he started, voice shaky, but the proof was undeniable. I watched as the room shifted, some family members whispered, others stared, stunned. For the first time, Dylan had nowhere to hide. His casual arrogance collapsed under the weight of the truth, and I felt a surge of something I hadn't allowed myself in years: validation. The confrontation was brutal, raw, and painful. Tears welled in my eyes as I spoke, not just about the money, but about every manipulation, every lie, every moment I had sacrificed for him. The relief of finally being heard, of finally standing up, was intoxicating. And as Dylan's gaze faltered, I realized the power dynamic had irreversibly shifted. By the end of the night, it was clear, nothing would ever be the same. Dylan no longer had control, no leverage, and no excuses left. And though the tension still lingered like a heavy fog, I finally felt a sense of clarity, a first taste of freedom I hadn't known in years. After that confrontation, I knew I had to make it permanent. I couldn't let Dylan have any access to my life again. I blocked his phone, changed every password, and made sure all my accounts were secure. It was terrifying at first. A part of me still longed for the brother I had believed in for so long, the one I had hoped would grow up. But every time I remembered the betrayal, the manipulation, and the cold calculation in his eyes, I knew I was doing the right thing. The first few weeks were the hardest. Silence stretched long and heavy over my apartment. No calls, no messages, no excuses, just quiet. I felt guilt gnawing at me, thinking maybe I was overreacting or being too harsh. But that guilt faded slowly as I rebuilt my boundaries, one firm decision at a time. Each victory, no matter how small, reminded me that I was reclaiming my life. I started redirecting my energy into things I had neglected, saving for my future, investing in hobbies, and repairing relationships I had put on hold while carrying Dylan's weight. I saw friends, went on trips, and for the first time in years, allowed myself to breathe without the constant shadow of his manipulation. It felt like waking from a long, suffocating nightmare. Even with the relief, I still had moments of doubt. What if the family judged me? What if I'd been too harsh? But the clarity grew stronger each day. I realized that loyalty is important, yes, but self-preservation is crucial. And the most powerful lesson was this: I had value, my time and effort mattered, and no one, not even my own brother, could take that from me again. By the time the month ended, I was living life on my terms. Dylan's absence was a heavy, liberating silence. And for the first time in a long time, I felt what it truly meant to be free. Months later, I finally felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, they no longer controlled me. I had reclaimed my life, my finances, and my peace of mind. Even though Dylan occasionally tried to reach out through mutual friends, I ignored it. I realized that some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt, and some lessons are meant to be learned the hard way. I spent time reflecting on everything: the years I had sacrificed, the trust one had given blindly, the emotional toll of being someone else's safety net. Therapy helped me unpack it all, understand why I had allowed myself to be manipulated, and recognize the toxic patterns that had taken root. I learned that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's survival. And that sometimes, walking away is the only way to protect yourself from people who will never value you. Family dynamics shifted too. Some relatives, finally seeing the truth, reached out to apologize for their part in enabling Dylan. Others distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the confrontation and the clarity it brought. It didn't matter. I was no longer the brother everyone relied on to clean up messes. I was the one in control, building my life without guilt or compromise. Financially, I rebuilt slowly but surely, learning from every mistake and ensuring that nothing could be taken from me again. I invested in myself, pursued goals I had delayed, and finally allowed myself the freedom to dream again. The relief was palpable, walking through the city streets, hearing familiar sounds, and not feeling the constant dread of being manipulated, it was almost intoxicating. The most powerful lesson I learned: loyalty is valuable, but self-respect is priceless. I didn't just walk away from a thief, I walked toward myself, toward empowerment, toward a life built on my terms. And in that journey, I realized something extraordinary: the real shock isn't the betrayal itself, it's how dramatically life can improve when you finally let go of people who never valued you.